Uneducated psychologist here, ready for continuing chapter 11. Let's make sure we are up and running. All right. So obviously SUNGUN should be probably a solar panel manufacturer. So started putting that in the chapter 1. So let's put it in here and then see if it fits. Aside from just the wireless inverter, rest of the story business. But where we are. So from the beginning, Moto was hooked. The non-stop analysis of society from a super unique perspective, exactly what a self-starter needed. Moto already had a pretty good idea what personality type he was, an extroverted sensing and feeling perceiver. That was important for that was important to know when working with robots, either on the factory floor or in the Priverse. The constant need for re-education, a confusing blend of goal setting and outcome analysis. Okay, so what's going on here? Re-education. Is that how you spell re-education? It's a good question. Yeah, that's how you spell it. Okay. So, Moto put together an instructional video to learn solar panel production through teaching AI how to do the work. The man in the loop maintained man in the loop course correcting to stay on target. Yeah, okay. The first video, this is gonna be weird. Okay, what do I have here? The first video was titled Mind of God in MBTI, and from the first five, and after the first 5 minutes, Moto was hooked. Uneducated psychologist here for the first time. What are we going to talk about? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, super basic stuff. Stuff that nobody wants to get into, but I think the time has come to get into it. And that is that the MBTI has become relevant to me, and I'm going to explain why. It's pretty simple. Myers-Briggs type indicator, I'm sure we've all heard of it. Taken tests and said, yeah, it's kind of right. Almost as accurate as astrology. But if we take a second look, or maybe if you really dive into astrology super deep, you see that it could be much more accurate. I have not dove into astrology to any level, so which I do believe is accurate to some degree, but to verify and validate to what degree I have not done. But when it comes to the MBTI, I have anecdotally for sure. It has become useful. Why 4 sides of the mind? We all have been in the ego, which is most tests. And then sometimes we deal with the subconscious, which is in the ego, which is what the Russians did in the 1970s. Which is what Freud did as well. But we didn't touch the unconscious and the superego before he talked about it. But he really go into depth over it all. But can he really go into depth over it? Okay. With all of his focus, Moto continued to watch even through the most annoying commercial ever. The longest 5 seconds before he could skip. So the name I'm going to toss out is John Beebe. Oh dear, am I really? That's the only name I'm going to say, even though there's a lot of people out there that I can reference. But an academic source, that would be it. The idea is simple. Simply that we can address each side on its own, like its own person, which a lot of people say we have different people within us, and that's where you would see it. But what I have recently discovered, which is a nexus, I know it's a cheesy word like synthesis or synergy, but it's relevant. And that's DISC. The worst absolute garbage personality test you can take. I have found relevance to lately for work and my new role, my new job in sales. Another commercial popped up on Moto, the timing totally taking him out of the moment. We kind of went over the DISC test and I was like, oh, this thing is it's too simple. It's simplistic. But then I found if there were a way to link it to the MBTI with the 4 sides of the mind, which is way too complicated. I will eventually go over how complicated. But to keep it simple, MBTI and DISC can be combined so we can work at different scales. If the DISC is simplistic, but still has some relevance at a particular scale, we can use that as a general entry point. And I'll go into those details later. But just a heads up, that's the point. Again, with the commercials, only this time there were 2, each a full 15 seconds. And without the ability to skip. Originally, what struck me was a kind of truth, was how using these 4 sides of the mind for one person, and there's 16 types. If you add them all up for every single person, you get the mind of God. Now, I'm going to throw one more idea when it comes to MBTI DISC, which is psychology. And this The last part has to do with a kind of theory of everything, which of course we're all waiting for. And we may have found it, even though I'm not going to throw out the names that are associated with it. I will say the idea, and it is newish, and it is all-encompassing, and it can be complicated, but it is assembly theory. Assembly theory. And that is kind of like the matrix idea, except the digital aspect isn't purely virtual in some simulation, but that our biology is the computer, and it must be. That is the way the universe renders itself is through chemistry, not through some other source. And of course, there is a relationship with scale, I believe. But this struck me as very meaningful and consistent, and I'll go over where. So those are the things that, the reason I'm even presenting these ideas is that there is something there. Moto could not believe. Another commercial popped up right at the end of the video, like some kind of personality test designed by a social media AI. And I think it's important to record a history of how we can use it and go forward. And that, I must say, uneducated psychologist out. The final image was a flipped around view from the cap cage looking at Nina's face to what Nina was looking at the entire time he spoke, a view of the sun sitting behind an old western water tower next to a pine tree, all through the front windshield of his car, of his EV. Moto's introverted parent felt meaning through constructing a personal philosophy of positive, negative, and neutral values embodied with immunity to authority. Uneducated psychologist.